Welcome to another quiet journey through history. Tonight, we're going to step into the world of medieval scribes, those patient souls who spent their days copying manuscripts letter by letter, word by word, line by line. There's something deeply calming about the work they did. The slow scratch of quill on parchment, the careful dipping of the pen into ink, the gentle rhythm of a day measured not in hours, but in pages completed. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this sound. The soft scratching of a feather quill moving across stretched animal skin. It's a sound that echoed through monastery scriptoria for nearly 1,000 years. From the fall of Rome to the dawn of the printing press. It's a sound that meant learning was being preserved. Knowledge was being copied. Words were being saved from the inevitable decay of time. In the medieval period, roughly spanning from the 5th to the 15th century, books were precious things. Not just valuable in the way we might say an antique is valuable, but truly precious in the way that gold or jewels are precious. Each one was made entirely by hand. There were no printing presses, no photocopy machines, no computers, no way to duplicate a text, except to sit down and write it out again, from beginning to end, letter by letter. A single book might cost as much as a farm. A large Bible might be worth a herd of cattle or a small house. And so the scribes worked, day after day, year after year, decade after decade. They preserved the knowledge. They copied religious texts, the Bible, the writings of the church fathers, liturgical books for church services. They recorded histories, chronicling the reigns of kings and the deeds of saints. They maintained the written word, ensuring that it didn't simply disappear when a single copy was lost to fire, flood, or the simple decay of age. We often think of medieval times as dark and chaotic, full of knights and battles and dramatic events. And yes, there were wars and plagues and upheavals. But the truth is that much of medieval life was quite mundane, quite ordinary, quite boring, in the best possible way. And nowhere was this more true than in the scriptorium, the room where scribes did their work. It was a place of order, of quiet, of repetition. It was a place where today was very much like yesterday, and tomorrow would be very much like today. So settle in. Let the world outside fade away. Turn down the lights if you can. Get comfortable. Tonight, we're not going anywhere exciting. We're not witnessing any great battles or dramatic turning points in history. We're simply going to spend time with a scribe, watching him work, understanding his routine, feeling the weight and rhythm of his day. The pace will be slow, deliberately slow. The details will be small, sometimes very small, and that's exactly as it should be. We'll follow a man we'll call Brother Thomas, a monk at a Benedictine monastery in England, sometime around the year 1320. He's 38 years old. He's been a scribe for 23 years now, since he entered the monastery as a boy of 15. He knows his craft thoroughly. His hands have formed hundreds of thousands of letters, perhaps millions. He's copied dozens of books, maybe more than 100. He can't remember the exact number anymore. They blur together in his memory. Brother Thomas isn't anyone famous. He didn't write any great theological works or discover any important historical facts. His name appears in no history books, but his work mattered. The books he copied were read by others, who learned from them, who were influenced by them. And some of those books may have survived to the present day. carrying Brother Thomas's careful letters forward through the centuries, even though his name has been forgotten. Tonight, we'll walk through his day from beginning to end. We'll see how he wakes, how he prepares for work, how he forms each letter, how he mixes his inks and cuts his quills. We'll feel the ache in his back and the cramp in his fingers. We'll experience the quiet satisfaction of a page completed, the frustration of an error that must be scraped away, the simple pleasure of good light on a clear day. And through it all, we'll move slowly, very slowly. Because that's how medieval scribes worked. They couldn't rush. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes meant hours of work wasted. They had to be patient, methodical, careful. They had to let the work take the time it needed to take. So breathe deeply. Relax your shoulders. Let your mind slow down. We're entering a world where time moves differently, where a single page might take half a day to complete, where the goal isn't to finish quickly, but to finish well. We're entering the world of Brother Thomas, scribe and monk, on an ordinary day in the year 1320. Brother Thomas wakes in darkness, complete and total darkness. There are no streetlights outside his window, no glow from digital clocks or phones, no ambient light pollution. When night falls in the medieval world, it falls completely. The only light comes from the moon and stars when they're visible, or from candles and torches, which are expensive and used sparingly. His cell is small, perhaps 8 feet by 10 feet, barely larger than a modern walk-in closet. The walls are stone, thick and cold, part of the monastery's ancient structure. The monastery itself is built in the traditional quadrangular plan. 4 ranges of buildings arranged around a central courtyard, with the church forming one side. Brother Thomas's cell is on the 2nd floor of the dormitory range, one of 20 similar cells where the monks sleep. He has a wooden bed, really more of a raised platform, with a straw-filled mattress on top. The straw is changed periodically, when it becomes too compressed and matted to provide any cushioning. The mattress is covered with rough linen, and he has a single wool blanket for warmth. In winter, he might add a 2nd blanket, but tonight, in mid-April, 1 is sufficient. On a small shelf built into the stone wall sits a wooden cross, about 6 inches tall, roughly carved. It's the only decoration in the room. Next to it is the stub of a candle burned down to less than an inch. Candles are precious, and Brother Thomas uses them only when absolutely necessary. A small wooden chest sits at the foot of his bed, containing his spare habit and a few personal items. A comb, a small knife, a spare pair of sandals. The bell rings. It's a large bronze bell in the church tower, and its deep, resonant tone carries throughout the monastery and into the surrounding fields. This is the bell for matins, the first of the day's 7 prayer services in the divine office. The monks call these services the hours, and they structure the entire day. Matins is typically held around 2 or 3 in the morning, depending on the season and the monastery's particular customs. Brother Thomas doesn't need to see a clock to know it's time to rise. His body has internalized the rhythm after 23 years. He can tell by the quality of the darkness, by the feel of the air, by some internal sense that this is the right time. Even if the bell didn't ring, he would wake. He sits up slowly. His body is stiff from lying still for several hours. His lower back aches, as it always does. This is the legacy of years spent hunched over a writing desk. The discs in his spine are compressed, the muscles are chronically tight. When he was younger, the pain would fade as he moved through the day. Now, at 38, it never fully goes away. He swings his legs over the edge of the bed and stands. His bare feet touch the cold stone floor. The chill runs up through his legs. He reaches for his habit, which hangs on a wooden peg on the wall. The habit is a long woolen robe, dark brown in color, belted at the waist with a rope. It's the same habit he wears every day. He has two habits, the one he's wearing and the spare in the chest, but they're identical. In fact, they're virtually indistinguishable from the habits worn by every other monk in the monastery. He pulls the habit over his head, adjusting it so it hangs properly. The wool is rough against his skin. It's not uncomfortable exactly, but it's not soft either. Comfort isn't the point. The habit is practical, durable, modest. It marks him as a monk, as someone who has renounced worldly possessions and vanities. Under the habit, he wears a simple linen undertunic. He's slept in this undertunic, as monks typically do. There's no concept of special sleeping clothes. You sleep in your basic garments and add layers during the day as needed. He slides his feet into his shoes, which are more like sandals, made of thick leather with straps that wrap around his ankles. In winter, he might wear woolen socks or wrap his feet in cloth for extra warmth. But spring has arrived, and the worst of the cold is past. Brother Thomas leaves his cell, pulling the door closed behind him. The door is simple wood, undecorated, with a basic latch. There are no locks on the doors. Privacy exists, but it's privacy of custom and respect, rather than physical barriers. A closed door means someone wants to be alone, and that wish is honored. He steps into the corridor, which is dark, except for a single torch burning at the far end. The torch throws dancing shadows on the stone walls. Other doors are opening, and other monks are emerging, all moving in the same direction, toward the night stairs that lead down to the church. They move quietly like shadows themselves. No one speaks. The rule of Saint Benedict, which governs their lives, prescribes periods of silence, and the hours before dawn are among the strictest. Brother Thomas joins the silent procession. He recognizes his fellow monks by their shapes and gaits rather than by their faces, which are barely visible in the darkness. There's Brother Benedict, the oldest scribe, walking slowly with his hand on the wall for balance. There's Brother William, young and energetic, taking the stairs two at a time. There's Brother Peter, the illuminator, moving with a slight limp from an old injury. They file down the stairs, which are narrow and worn smooth by centuries of feet. The stone is cold under their shoes. They emerge into the cloister, the covered walkway that runs around the central courtyard. The night air is cool and damp, carrying the scent of the herb garden and the faint smell of the stables beyond the monastery walls. The church door stands open, and candlelight spills out into the darkness. The monks enter, one by one, and take their places in the choir stalls. The church is the heart of the monastery, and the choir is where the monks spend many hours each day, singing the psalms and prayers that make up the divine office. The church is cold, always cold. Stone buildings hold the chill, and there's no heating except for braziers on the coldest winter nights. Brother Thomas can see his breath forming small clouds in the candlelit air. He pulls his habit closer around himself, tucking his hands into his sleeves. The choir stalls are arranged in 2 rows, facing each other across the central aisle. Brother Thomas takes his assigned place on the north side, about halfway down. The stalls are wooden, carved with simple decorations. Each has a seat that can fold up, and a ledge called a misericord that provides support when standing during long services. After 23 years, Brother Thomas knows his stall intimately. Every scratch in the wood, every slight irregularity in the carved surface. The abbot enters last and takes his place at the head of the choir. He's an older man, in his 60s, with a white beard and a commanding presence. He raises his hand, and the service begins. Domin labia mea aperies, the abbot intones. Lord, open my lips. Et osmum annunciabit laudem tuam. The monks respond, and my mouth shall declare your praise. The chant begins. Gregorian chant, the ancient form of liturgical music that has been sung in monasteries for centuries. It's monophonic, meaning there's only one melodic line with no harmony. The monks sing in unison, their voices blending into a single sound that fills the stone space and echoes off the vaulted ceiling. Brother Thomas knows these chants by heart. He's sung them thousands of times. His voice joins with the others automatically, requiring no thought. The Latin words flow through his mind, psalms of praise, psalms of lament, psalms of petition, Deus in adiutorium meum intende. O God, come to my assistance. Domine, id adiuvandum me festina. O Lord, make haste to help me. The service follows a fixed structure. There are hymns, psalms, readings from scripture, and prayers. Everything is prescribed in the monastery's liturgical books. Nothing is improvised or spontaneous. This is one of the comforts of monastic life, the predictability, the sense that you're participating in something ancient and unchanging, something that connects you to countless generations of monks who have sung these same words in this same way. Matins lasts about an hour, though Brother Thomas doesn't think about the time. Time is fluid during prayer. Sometimes an hour feels like minutes, sometimes it feels much longer. Tonight, or this morning rather, his mind is relatively focused. He thinks about the page he was working on yesterday, the illuminated initial he needs to begin today. He visualizes the design in his mind. A capital letter B, about 3 inches tall, with blue body and red vine scrolls. He's made this design before, many times. His hands already know the movements. But he also tries to focus on the prayers themselves, on their meaning. This is the purpose of the divine office, to sanctify the hours, to turn the mind repeatedly toward God throughout the day and night. Praise the Lord, all nations, the choirs and chants. Extol him, all peoples, for great is his steadfast love toward us, and the faithfulness of the Lord endures forever. After matins comes Lauds, the second hour of the day. Lauds means praises, and it's meant to welcome the coming dawn. Though it's still dark outside, the service looks forward to the light, to the new day that God is bringing. More psalms, more hymns, more prayers. Brother Thomas's legs are beginning to ache from standing. His back protests, but he remains still, his posture correct, his attention directed toward the altar and the large crucifix that hangs above it. By the time Lauds ends, the sky is beginning to lighten. Not sunrise yet, but the deep black of night is giving way to dark blue, and then to grey. The monks file out of the church in the same silence they entered. The great silence is still in effect, and won't be lifted until after the morning meal. They make their way to the refectory, the dining hall. It's a large room with long wooden tables and benches. The walls are bare except for a single painting of the Last Supper at one end. The room smells of smoke from the braziers, and of food, bread and onions, and the musty scent of old rushes on the floor. The monks take their places at the tables. Brother Thomas sits with the other scribes and several monks who work in the library. There's a hierarchy to seating, but it's subtle, based on seniority and position rather than rank. The abbot sits at a separate table on a raised platform, along with the prior and a few other senior monks. A servant, one of the lay brothers who perform manual labor for the monastery, brings bread and places it on the table. The bread is coarse duck, made from rye and barley with some wheat mixed in by. It's yesterday's bread, slightly stale, but that doesn't matter. It's food, sustenance. There's also cheese, hard and pungent, aged for months. And there's drink. Weak ale, watered down, barely alcoholic. Water alone isn't safe to drink in many places, so ale or wine is the standard beverage. Brother Thomas tears off a piece of bread. It's tough, requiring real effort to chew. He takes his time, chewing thoroughly, tasting the grain, the slight sourness of the fermentation. He takes a bite of cheese, its sharp flavor cutting through the blandness of the bread. He sips his ale, feeling the liquid wash away the dryness in his mouth. While the monks eat, one of their numbers stands at a lectern and reads aloud. This is another part of the rule. Meals are taken in silence while listening to sacred reading. Today's reading is from the lives of the saints, the story of Saint Anthony of Egypt, the desert father who lived as a hermit and battled demons. The reader's voice echoes in the stone hall, rising and falling with the rhythm of the Latin prose. Brother Thomas listens with half his attention while he eats. He's heard this story many times before. Anthony's temptations in the desert, his visions, his teachings to his disciples. It's edifying material, meant to inspire the monks to greater holiness, to remind them that they're following in a long tradition of Christian asceticism and self-denial. He eats slowly, methodically. There's no need to rush. The meal will last as long as the reading lasts, about 20 minutes. When his piece of bread is gone, he doesn't take another. The portion he was given is his portion, and he's learned to be satisfied with it. Monks don't eat for pleasure. They eat for necessity. Too much food makes one drowsy and interferes with prayer and work. Too little food weakens the body. The goal is moderation, the middle path. When the reading ends, the monks stand. The abbot says a brief prayer of thanksgiving, and then they file out of the refectory. The sun is fully up now, and the day's work can begin. Brother Thomas makes his way across the courtyard toward the scriptorium. He walks slowly, in no hurry. The morning air is fresh and cool. Birds are singing in the trees that grow along the monastery wall. Sparrows, blackbirds, the occasional crow. The sky is clear, promising good light for working. The scriptorium is located on the second floor of the library building, which houses the monastery's collection of books. The collection isn't large by modern standards, perhaps 200 manuscripts in total, but it represents centuries of accumulated knowledge. There are Bibles, liturgical books, writings of the Church Fathers, some classical texts, a few histories and chronicles, some medical and astronomical treatises. Brother Thomas climbs the wooden stairs to the second floor. His hand runs along the railing, worn smooth by countless touches. The scriptorium occupies a large room with windows on 3 sides, designed to maximize natural light. The windows face south, east, and west, ensuring that the room has good illumination throughout the day. The windows are glazed, which is relatively unusual and expensive. Most rooms have only shutters or oiled cloth covering the window openings. But the scriptorium needs the light, and glass lets in light while keeping out wind and rain. The room contains 10 writing desks, each positioned beneath a window. The desks are made of oak, solid and heavy, angled at about 30 degrees. This angle makes writing easier, reducing the strain on the scribe's back and allowing him to see the page more clearly. Each desk has a footrest, a wooden bar where the scribe can rest his feet, and a small shelf underneath for storing materials. 7 of the 10 desks are currently in use. Brother Thomas's desk is the third from the left, beneath a particularly large window. He's worked at this same desk for 15 years, ever since Brother Aelred, the previous occupant, died. The desk feels like his own now, familiar and comfortable in the way that something becomes after long use. On the desk sits his current project, a book of Psalms. The book is large, about 18 inches tall and 12 inches wide when open. The pages are made of vellum, the finest grade of parchment, made from calfskin. The book is bound in wooden boards covered with brown leather. So far, Brother Thomas has completed 43 pages. The full book will contain 200 pages when finished, with all 150 psalms, plus various prayers and canticles. He estimates it will take him another 3 months to complete the entire manuscript, working 6 days a week, about 5 hours a day. Next to the book sits his inkpot, a small ceramic vessel with a narrow mouth to prevent spills. The ink is dark, almost black, though in bright light it has a slightly brownish tint. This is iron gall ink, the standard writing ink of medieval scribes. There's a second smaller inkpot containing red ink. This is made from vermilion, a bright red pigment derived from cinnabar. He uses it for decorative capitals and for rubrics, the headings and instructions written in red. His quills sit in a wooden box, about a dozen of them in various stages of use. Some are fresh, newly cut and ready to use. Others are worn, their nibs splayed or split from use. He keeps them all because sometimes a worn quill is useful for making broad strokes or for practicing techniques. His knife lies on the desk, its blade about 3 inches long, very sharp. He uses it for multiple purposes: sharpening quills, scraping away errors, trimming parchment, and occasionally for cutting the thread used in binding. The knife has a bone handle, smooth from years of use. There's also a straight edge, a thin piece of wood about 2 feet long for ruling lines, a small piece of pumice stone for smoothing parchment, a dish of powdered chalk for absorbing excess ink, a few small pots of pigment for illumination work, and scraps of parchment for testing his quill or practicing difficult letters. Everything is arranged precisely, everything in its place. Brother Thomas knows where each item is without looking. This order is necessary. When you're working on a manuscript that will take months to complete, you can't afford to waste time searching for tools or materials. He settles onto his stool, a simple wooden seat with no back. The stool is at just the right height. adjusted over years to fit his body. He flexes his fingers, warming them up. The morning is still slightly cool, and his hands are stiff. He needs them to be loose and responsive before he begins writing. He looks at the page he was working on yesterday. It's half finished, 13 lines of text in his careful hand. The letters are clear and even, the spacing consistent. He's satisfied with his work. Today, he'll complete this page and begin the next. But first, he needs to prepare. There are rituals to beginning the day's work, procedures that must be followed. He can't simply pick up a quill and start writing. The materials must be checked, the tools must be readied, the mind must be settled and focused. Brother Thomas closes his eyes for a moment and says a brief prayer. Lord, guide my hand that I may write truly and well. Help me to preserve your word without error. Let this work be pleasing to you. It's a prayer he's said thousands of times, but it's not meaningless repetition. It's a reminder, a refocusing, a way of setting his intention for the work ahead. He opens his eyes and reaches for his inkpot. The work is about to begin. The first task of the day, before any actual writing can begin, is to check and prepare the materials. This is not glamorous work. It's not the kind of thing that comes to mind when people imagine the life of a medieval scribe. But it's absolutely essential. Poor materials lead to poor work, and poor work is worse than no work at all. Brother Thomas starts with the parchment. The page he'll be working on today is already part of the bound book, so he can't remove it to examine it separately. Instead, he runs his hand over the surface, feeling for imperfections. Parchment is made from animal skin, and despite the skill of the parchment makers, it's never perfectly uniform. There can be thin spots where the skin was scraped too aggressively. There can be rough patches where hair follicles create small bumps. There can be holes from damage or disease in the original hide. The vellum he's using for this project is of very good quality. It's smooth and creamy white, with only occasional minor flaws. He feels a small rough spot about halfway down the page, a tiny area maybe a 1/4 inch across where the texture is slightly uneven. This won't be a problem. It's far enough from the text area that it won't affect his writing. But he notes its location mentally, so he doesn't accidentally catch his quill on it. The surface of vellum has a slightly waxy feel, which comes from the parchment's natural oils and from the preparation process. This waxy quality is actually helpful for writing. It helps the ink sit on the surface without soaking in too deeply. But if the surface becomes too oily from handling or from humidity in the air, the ink won't adhere properly. Brother Thomas sometimes dusts the page lightly with powdered pumice or chalk to absorb excess oil. But today the surface feels right. He moves on to examining his ink. The pot sits open on his desk, where it's been since yesterday evening. Iron gall ink is relatively stable and doesn't dry out quickly, but it can thicken if left too long, especially in dry weather. Brother Thomas dips a thin wooden stick into the pot and lifts it out, watching how the ink flows off the stick. The consistency is perfect, thick enough to flow smoothly from the quill without running or blotting, but thin enough that it won't clog the nib. If the ink were too thin, it would spread on the parchment, making the letters fuzzy and indistinct. If it were too thick, it would clot and skip, leaving gaps in the strokes. Getting the consistency right is more art than science. something learned through experience rather than measurement. The color is good too, a deep, dark brown that will darken to black as it oxidizes over the coming days and weeks. Fresh iron gall ink often has a grayish or brownish cast, but as the iron compounds react with oxygen, the color deepens. Some of the oldest manuscripts have ink that's so deeply black it looks almost wet, even after centuries. Brother Thomas made this batch of ink 6 days ago, following the recipe he learned as a young novice. The process starts with collecting oak galls. These are the round, hard growths that appear on oak trees caused by wasp larvae. The galls are crushed into a coarse powder, which is then soaked in water, rainwater is best, for several days. The water extracts the tannic acid from the galls, turning it a dark brownish color. After soaking, the liquid is strained to remove the solid particles. Then comes the crucial step, adding ferrous sulfate, commonly called green vitriol or copperas. This is a mineral compound that can be purchased from apothecaries or extracted from certain iron-bearing rocks. When the ferrous sulfate is added to the tannin solution, a chemical reaction occurs, creating a dark, stable pigment. The final ingredient is gum arabic, a natural gum collected from acacia trees in Africa and the Middle East. The gum arabic acts as a binder, making the ink thick enough to cling to the quill and to the parchment. It also helps the ink resist fading and prevents it from flaking off the page over time. The proportions of these ingredients matter. Too much ferrous sulfate makes the ink corrosive, and over centuries, it can actually eat through the parchment. Too little, and the ink will be pale and will fade quickly. Too much gum arabic makes the ink too thick and gummy. Too little, and it will be watery and will bleed. Brother Thomas has made ink hundreds of times. He knows by sight and feel when the proportions are right. But even with experience, there's variability. The oak galls differ in quality, depending on when they were harvested and where they came from. The ferrous sulfate varies in purity. The gum arabic can be fresher or older, more or less refined. Each batch of ink is slightly different, and the scribe must adjust his technique accordingly. Today's ink is behaving well. Brother Thomas replaces the stick in its holder, satisfied. He won't need to make more ink for at least another week, probably longer. Next, he turns his attention to his quills. He opens the wooden box and examines the contents. The quills are goose feathers, taken from the primary wing feathers. Wing feathers are preferred because they're strong and have a natural curve that fits comfortably in the hand. The curve also helps direct the ink flow toward the nib. Each quill has been carefully prepared. The feathers were first hardened by being heated in hot sand or ashes, a process called curing or tempering. This makes the shaft less brittle and more durable. Then the barbs, the soft feathery parts on either side of the shaft, were stripped away. They were beautiful, but they get in the way when writing. A writing quill is just the bare shaft, with a carefully shaped nib at the tip. Brother Thomas selects a quill that's been used before, but still has plenty of life left. He examines the nib closely. The tip is cut at an angle, creating a flat, chisel-like edge. This shape is what allows the quill to make both thin and thick strokes, depending on the angle at which it's held. When the pen is held with the flat edge perpendicular to the page, it makes a thin line. When it's held parallel to the page, it makes a thick line. This variation in stroke width is what gives medieval handwriting its characteristic appearance. The nib is slightly worn from yesterday's use, with a tiny split beginning to form at the tip. This is normal. Quills wear down relatively quickly, and a scribe might go through several quills in a day of intensive work. Brother Thomas takes his knife and carefully trims the nib, cutting away the split portion and reshaping the tip. The knife is extremely sharp, and the cut must be clean and precise. A ragged cut will cause the nib to catch and skip on the parchment. He tests the reshaped quill on a scrap of parchment, making a few practice strokes. The line is clean and even, with good ink flow. The nib has a little bit of flexibility, enough to respond to pressure but not so much that it's hard to control. Perfect. His knife goes back to its place on the desk. The quill is ready. The ink is ready. The parchment is ready. He has everything he needs. Brother Thomas takes a slow, deep breath. He lets it out gradually, feeling his shoulders drop, feeling the tension leave his body. This moment of pause before beginning is important. It's a transition, a mental shift from preparation to execution. His mind must be clear and focused. His hand must be steady, and any nervousness or distraction will show in the work. He dips the quill into the ink pot, letting the liquid fill the hollow shaft. He taps the quill gently against the rim of the pot to remove excess ink. Too much ink on the nib will cause blots and drips. He positions the quill above the parchment, finding the right spot to begin. And then, with a small movement that's both confident and delicate, he begins to write. Actually, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before Brother Thomas can write, he needs to rule the page. We mentioned this briefly before, but let's take a moment to really understand this process, because it's crucial to the appearance of the finished manuscript. Medieval manuscripts have a very orderly appearance. The lines of text are straight and parallel. The margins are even. The spacing is consistent from one page to the next. This doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of careful planning and preparation. The page Brother Thomas is working on has already been written on in the upper half. That half was completed yesterday, but the lower half is blank, and it needs to be ruled before he can continue. He sets aside his quill for a moment and picks up his straight edge and stylus. The straight edge is a thin piece of wood, perfectly straight, about 2 feet long. The stylus is a blunt-tipped metal tool, a bit like a nail with the point filed down. Brother Thomas places the straight edge across the parchment, about 1/4 inch below the last line of yesterday's text. He holds it firmly with his left hand, while his right hand draws the stylus along the edge. The stylus doesn't scratch or cut the parchment. Instead, it makes a shallow groove, a line that's barely visible but can be felt with a fingertip. This grooved line will guide his writing, keeping the text straight. The pressure of the stylus compresses the fibers of the parchment slightly, creating a subtle channel where the bases of the letters will sit. He moves the straight edge down, measuring the distance by eye and by habit. The spacing between lines is standardized for this particular manuscript, about 5 millimeters from one baseline to the next. This spacing has to allow enough room for the letters without wasting parchment. Parchment is expensive, and efficient use of space is important. But the lines can't be too close together, or the page will look cramped and be difficult to read. Brother Thomas rules another line, then another, working his way down the page. The motion is rhythmic and repetitive. Position the straight edge, hold it firmly, draw the stylus, move the straight edge, repeat. His hands know the movements. He doesn't have to concentrate intensely. The work is almost meditative. For this page, he needs to rule 13 more lines. The page will have 26 lines total when complete, matching all the other pages in the manuscript. Consistency is important. A book where the pages have different numbers of lines or different line spacing looks disorganized and unprofessional. After ruling the horizontal lines for the text, Brother Thomas also needs to rule vertical lines for the margins. Every page has generous margins on all 4 sides, about 1.5 inches on the left, where the pages are bound, about 1 inch on the right, about 1 inch at the top, and about 1.5 inches at the bottom. These margins serve multiple purposes. They frame the text, making it easier to read by providing visual space around it. They provide room for decorative elements like illuminated borders. They protect the text from damage. When someone handles the book, their fingers touch the margins, not the writing itself. And they allow for marginalia notes and comments that readers might add later. The margin lines are ruled vertically from top to bottom of the page. Brother Thomas uses the straight edge and stylus again, creating subtle grooves that define the text area. These lines won't be visible in the finished manuscript. They're guides, not decorative elements, but they're essential for maintaining the layout. The ruling process takes about 10 minutes for a half page. It's not difficult work, but it requires attention and precision. If the lines aren't straight, if the spacing is inconsistent, the text will look crooked or uneven, and all the subsequent work will be compromised. When the ruling is complete, Brother Thomas sets down his straight edge and stylus. He runs his finger lightly over the grooved lines, feeling their spacing, checking his work. Everything looks good. The page is ready for text. Now, finally, he can begin writing. Brother Thomas picks up his quill again and dips it in the ink. He positions himself comfortably on his stool, his feet resting on the footrest, his body angled slightly toward the desk. His left hand rests lightly on the edge of the page, steadying it. His right hand holds the quill at a comfortable angle, about 45 degrees to the page. He looks at the exemplar, the manuscript he's copying from. It sits on a small reading desk to his left, angled so he can see it clearly without having to turn his whole body. The exemplar is an older copy of the Psalms, made about 50 years ago. The pages are beginning to yellow slightly, and there are small stains and marks from years of use. But the text is still perfectly legible. Brother Thomas finds his place in the exemplar. He's copying Psalm 45, which begins with the words, Eructavit cor meum verbum bonum. His task is to reproduce these words exactly, letter for letter. In his own manuscript, he reads the first few words silently, committing them to memory. Then he transfers his gaze to his own page, to the first blank line below yesterday's work. His quill hovers above the parchment for a moment. Then, with a smooth, controlled motion, he begins. The first letter is a capital E. In the Carolingian script that Brother Thomas uses, capital letters aren't drastically different from lowercase letters. They're simply larger and sometimes slightly more ornate. The E is formed with 3 horizontal strokes connected by a vertical stroke. Brother Thomas makes the vertical stroke first, a clean downward movement, then the 3 horizontal strokes, each one attached to the vertical. The movements are precise, practiced, automatic. The quill makes a soft scratching sound against the parchment. It's a pleasant sound, rhythmic and gentle. If you close your eyes and listen to a scriptorium full of scribes at work, you hear this sound multiplied, a soft, constant scratching, like leaves rustling in a breeze, or rain falling on a roof. After the E comes R, then U, then C, and so on. Each letter is formed with care. The strokes must be consistent, thick downstrokes, thin cross-strokes, maintained throughout the entire manuscript. This consistency is what makes medieval scripts so beautiful. They're not exactly mechanical, not perfectly uniform like printed type, but they have a regularity that comes from discipline and practice. Brother Thomas writes the first word, eructavit. He's pleased with how it looks. The letters are well formed, the spacing is even, the ink has flowed smoothly without any blots or skips. He dips his quill again and continues with the second word, cor. Then the third, meum. His hand moves across the page from left to right. The Carolingian script, like modern writing, proceeds left to right and top to bottom. This wasn't always the case. Some ancient scripts went right to left, and some even alternated direction from one line to the next. But by Brother Thomas's time, left to right is standard for Latin text. He works steadily, one word after another. The rhythm is soothing. Read a few words from the exemplars, hold them in memory, transfer attention to the page being written, reproduce the words, repeat. It's a rhythm that can be maintained for hours, once you've learned to find the flow. Every few words, Brother Thomas dips his quill again. The ink in the nib runs out relatively quickly, especially if the strokes are thick. He has to judge when to refill. If he waits too long, the letters will become pale and thin. If he refills too often, he wastes time and risks dripping ink on the page. The first line is complete. Eructavit cormum verbum bonum dico ego opera mea reg. My heart overflows with a goodly theme. I address my verses to the king. Brother Thomas doesn't pause to admire his work or to contemplate the meaning of the words, though he knows the meaning well. He simply moves to the next line and continues. An hour passes. Brother Thomas has completed 5 more lines. The work is going well. His hand is warmed up now, loose and responsive. The letters are flowing easily, without hesitation or uncertainty. This is the state he aims for, where the work becomes almost automatic, where his hands know what to do without requiring constant conscious direction from his mind. This state is sometimes called flow, though Brother Thomas doesn't have a word for it. He just knows that there are times when writing is easy and times when it's hard. And right now, it's easy. His attention is focused, but not strained. He's aware of what he's doing, but not obsessing over each individual stroke. The work is happening through him rather than being forced by him. Around mid-morning, the light from the window has grown strong and clear. This is the best time for detailed work, when the sun is high enough to provide good illumination, but not so high that it's directly in his eyes. The light falls across the page at an angle, making the texture of the parchment visible, showing every detail clearly. Brother Thomas's eyes are fresh, not yet tired from hours of close work. His back hasn't started aching yet, though there's a faint stiffness that he knows will worsen as the day progresses. His fingers are nimble, not yet cramped. This morning hour is precious, the time when his best work gets done. He continues writing, line after line. The psalm he's copying is one of the longer ones, 50 verses. It will take several pages to complete. But Brother Thomas doesn't think about the entire psalm. He thinks only about the current line, the current word, the current letter. If you think too much about how much work remains, it becomes overwhelming. Better to focus on the immediate task, letting the larger work take care of itself gradually. Every so often, Brother Thomas pauses to sharpen his quill. The nib wears down from rubbing against the parchment, and the tip can become blunt or split. When this happens, the letters lose their crispness. The lines become ragged. Brother Thomas can tell by feel and by sound when the quill needs attention. The scratching sound changes slightly, becoming rougher or more hesitant. He sets down the quill and picks up his knife. The knife is very sharp. It has to be to cut cleanly through the hard shaft of the quill. He examines the nib closely, identifying the problem. There's a small split on one side, and the tip has become slightly rounded. With quick, sure movements, he trims away the damaged portion and reshapes the nib. The knife shavings fall onto the desk, small curls of translucent quill shaft. He brushes them aside into a small pile. Later, at the end of the day, he'll collect all the day's shavings and discard them. Some scribes save the shavings and use them for kindling or to stuff cushions, but Brother Thomas just throws them away. He tests the resharpened quill on a scrap, making a few practice strokes. The nib is responsive again, making clean lines with good ink flow. He returns to his manuscript and continues where he left off. The rhythm resumes. Dip the quill, write a few words. Dip again, write. Check the exemplar. Transfer the text. Maintain the spacing. Keep the lines straight. Form each letter carefully, but not slowly. Let the work flow. This is what Brother Thomas does, day after day, year after year. This is his life's work, his contribution. He's not a theologian crafting new interpretations of Scripture. He's not a philosopher developing new ideas. He's a copyist, a transmitter, a preserver. He takes what already exists and reproduces it faithfully so that it can continue to exist. There's humility in this work. Brother Thomas isn't trying to make his mark, to create something original that will bear his name. His goal is to be invisible, to efface himself so completely that his personality and his hand disappear, leaving only the text itself. The best copying is copying where you can't tell who you did it, where the scribe's individual characteristics have been subsumed into the standard forms of the script. And yet, paradoxically, every scribe's work is slightly different. If you study manuscripts carefully, you can often identify the hand of individual scribes. There are subtle variations in letter formation, in spacing, in the way certain letter combinations are joined. These variations are like handwriting, individual markers that survive despite the scribe's attempt at standardization. Centuries from now, if a scholar examines this manuscript, they might be able to identify Brother Thomas's sondae, to say, this page was written by the same person who wrote these other pages in these other books. They won't know his name, probably, but they'll know his hand. And in a way, that's a kind of immortality, a trace of his existence preserved in ink and parchment, long after his body has returned to dust. But Brother Thomas doesn't think about this as he writes. He's not working for posterity or for recognition. He's working because it's his task, his duty, his offering to God. He's working because manuscripts need to be copied, and someone has to do the copying. And today that someone is him. The morning continues. The light shifts gradually as the sun moves across the sky. The other scribes work quietly at their desks, each absorbed in their own projects. The soft scratching of quills fills the room, a gentle background sound that's comforting in its familiarity. Brother Thomas reaches the end of a page and turns to the next blank sheet. He'll need to rule this page before continuing, so he sets down his quill and picks up his straightedge and stylus once more. The work continues. It will continue tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, until the manuscript is finished. And then there will be another manuscript, and another after that. This is the life of a scribe, patient, repetitive, essential, and in its own quiet way, beautiful. Brother Thomas has been writing for about 3 hours when he makes a mistake. It's a small mistake, easily made, but it still requires correction. He's copying a line from Psalm 47, and he's written in lauda, when the exemplar actually says in laudibus. He's left off the final syllable of the word. He doesn't notice the error immediately. His eyes have moved on to the next word in the exemplar, and his hand is forming the next letters on the page. But then something feels wrong. The rhythm is off. The line looks slightly short. He stops writing and glances back at what he's just completed. There it is, in laude, instead of in laudibus. A simple omission. His eye jumped from one word to the next too quickly, and his memory didn't hold the complete form of laudibus. It happens. Even after 23 years of experience, even with intense concentration, errors creep in. The human mind is fallible. Eyes skip. Memory plays tricks. Attention wanders for just a split second, and letters go missing or get transposed. Brother Thomas sets down his quill and examines the error more carefully. The mistake is in the middle of a line, with several more words following it. If he leaves it as is, the text will be wrong, which is unacceptable. A manuscript full of errors is worse than useless. It propagates those errors to future copies, contaminating the text and leading readers astray. He has several options for correction. The simplest would be to squeeze the missing syllable above the line, with a small mark indicating where it should be inserted. This is acceptable for informal documents or working copies, but this manuscript is being commissioned by a wealthy merchant. It needs to be as perfect as possible. Visible corrections, even minor ones, reduce the value and quality of the finished product. The better option is to scrape away the error and rewrite correctly. This requires time and care, but it results in a correction that's nearly invisible. Brother Thomas has become quite skilled at this over the years. He's probably scraped away and rewritten hundreds of errors, maybe thousands. He picks up his knife, the same knife he uses for sharpening quills. The blade is very sharp, and it needs to be for this kind of work. He positions the page so the light falls directly on the error, making it as visible as possible. Then, with extreme care, he begins to scrape. The motion is gentle, using the flat of the blade rather than the edge, and he holds the knife almost parallel to the page, at just a slight angle, and scrapes lightly across the offending text. The goal is to wear away the ink without damaging the parchment beneath it. Iron gall ink sits mostly on the surface of parchment, rather than soaking in deeply, which makes it possible to remove. But the ink has still bonded to the parchment fibers, and removing it takes patience. Brother Thomas scrapes carefully, using short, controlled strokes. He can feel the slight resistance as the blade catches on the dried ink. Gradually, the letters begin to fade. The black ink becomes grey, then lighter grey, then disappears entirely, leaving only a faint ghost of where the writing used to be. The parchment in that spot is now slightly rougher than the surrounding surface, slightly thinner, where the top layer of fibers has been scraped away. Brother Thomas stops scraping and examines his work. The error is gone, but the surface is too rough to write on immediately. Ink applied to a rough surface will bleed and blur. He needs to smooth and prepare the scraped area. He takes a piece of pumice stone, a light, porous volcanic rock that's slightly abrasive, and rubs it gently over the scraped area. The pumice polishes the parchment, smoothing down the rough fibers. He blows away the dust that the pumice creates, then rubs the area with a clean piece of linen cloth. The surface is smoother now, though still not quite as perfect as the untouched parchment around it. As a final step, Brother Thomas takes a pinch of powdered chalk and rubs it into the scraped area. The chalk absorbs any remaining moisture or oils, helps to fill in the scraped fibers, and provides a better writing surface. He rubs it in thoroughly, then brushes away the excess. Now the area is ready for rewriting. He picks up his quill, dips it carefully, and rewrites the corrected text, in laudibus. His hand is very steady. The new letters need to match the surrounding text as closely as possible in size, spacing, and color. Brother Thomas writes carefully, giving each letter his full attention. When he's finished, the correction is nearly invisible. If you didn't know where to look, you probably wouldn't notice it. The parchment is slightly more textured in that spot, and if you examine it in strong light at just the right angle, you can see a faint ghost of the erased letters beneath the new ones. But from a normal reading distance, the page looks clean and error-free. Brother Thomas is satisfied. The correction has cost him about 10 minutes, time spent scraping, smoothing, preparing, and rewriting. But it was necessary. Better to spend 10 minutes fixing an error than to let it stand and compromise the manuscript. He continues writing, picking up where he left off before discovering the mistake. The rhythm resumes. The work flows again. This small incident, this minor error, and its correction represents something important about the work of scribes. They were, in effect, the quality control system for preserving knowledge. In a world before printing, where every book was hand-copied, the accuracy of the scribes determined the accuracy of the historical and literary record. Errors were inevitable. Scribes were human, subject to fatigue, distraction, and simple mistakes. And these errors compounded over time. When a scribe copied a manuscript, any errors in the original would be carried forward to the new copy. If the scribe made additional errors of his own, the new copy would be even more corrupt than the original. Then, when someone copied from that copy, they would inherit all the accumulated errors and possibly add new ones. Over generations of copying, text could become seriously corrupted, with words changed, lines omitted, entire passages lost or garbled. Scholars studying ancient texts often have to compare multiple manuscript copies to try to determine what the original might have said, using principles of textual criticism to identify and correct the errors that crept in over centuries of transmission. Brother Thomas knows this, though he wouldn't use the term textual criticism. He knows that his work matters, that accuracy is paramount, that each error he allows to stand is an error that will be copied forward into the future. This knowledge weighs on him. It's a responsibility that he takes seriously. This is why he's willing to spend 10 minutes correcting a mistake that most people would never notice. It's why he checks and rechecks his work. It's why he works slowly and carefully, rather than rushing to complete pages quickly. Speed, without accuracy, is worthless. In fact, it's worse than worthless. It's actively harmful, because it creates corrupt texts that mislead readers and require correction by future generations. Some monasteries have specific rules about copying. Scribes are required to check their work daily, to have their completed pages reviewed by a senior scribe or by the librarian, to correct errors immediately rather than leaving them for later. Some scriptoria employ separate correctors, monks whose job is specifically to read through completed manuscripts and identify errors, and in Brother Thomas's monastery, the system is less formal. Each scribe is responsible for checking his own work, and there's an expectation that mistakes will be corrected before a manuscript is considered complete. The librarian does a final review of finished books, but by that point, there should be very few errors remaining. Brother Thomas has developed his own checking system over the years. At the end of each day, he reads through everything he's written that day, comparing it carefully to the exemplar. He reads slowly, word by word, letter by letter, looking for any discrepancies. This review usually takes about 20 minutes, but it's time well spent. He catches errors that would be much harder to fix later. After the ink has fully dried and hardened, he also tries to vary his checking method. Sometimes he reads forward, from beginning to end. Sometimes he reads backward, from end to beginning. Reading backward disrupts the meaning and makes you focus on the individual words rather than getting caught up in the sense of the passage. It's easier to spot errors when you're not following the narrative or argument. Despite all these precautions, errors still slip through occasionally. Brother Thomas has had the experience of discovering an error weeks or even months after making it, while paging through a manuscript for some other reason. By that point, the error is much harder to correct. The ink is fully dried and bonded to the parchment. The surrounding pages have been written, making it harder to access the page with the error. Correcting it might require unbinding part of the book, which is time-consuming and potentially damaging. So it's much better to catch errors quickly, while they're fresh, while the page is still easily accessible and the ink is still relatively easy to scrape away. This is why Brother Thomas has trained himself to be vigilant, to notice when something doesn't look quite right, to stop and check rather than pushing forward in the hope that everything is fine. This vigilance is mentally exhausting. It requires a constant low-level alertness, a monitoring of his own work, even while he's engaged in producing it. But it's necessary. It's part of the craft, part of what separates a good scribe from a mediocre one. Over his years of experience, Brother Thomas has come to recognize the different types of errors that scribes commonly make. Each type has its own cause and its own correction strategy. Omission errors, like the one he just corrected, are among the most common. The scribe's eye skips over a word, a syllable, or even an entire line. This often happens when the exemplar has two similar words or phrases close together. The scribe's eye, jumps from the first occurrence to the second, and everything in between gets lost. This is called homoiouteluton, when it involves words with similar endings, though Brother Thomas doesn't know the technical term. He just knows it happens and that he has to watch out for it. Substitution errors occur when the scribe writes a different but similar word than what appears in the exemplar: Lord instead of God, King instead of kingdom, which instead of that. These are particularly insidious because they often make grammatical sense, so they're harder to catch. The sentence reads smoothly, but it's not exactly what the original said. Transposition errors involve switching the order of letters or words. Form becomes from, amen becomes name, and to him becomes him too. Again, these often make sense grammatically, which makes them hard to spot. Addition errors are the opposite of omissions. The scribe adds something that wasn't in the original. This might be an extra word, a phrase repeated twice, or even marginal notes from the exemplar that get incorporated into the main text by mistake. Then there are what might be called correction errors, where the scribe, thinking he's found an error in the exemplar, corrects it, thus changing the text from what the author actually wrote. This is particularly dangerous because the scribe is acting with good intentions, but is actually corrupting the text. Brother Thomas tries not to make this kind of error. His job is to copy faithfully, not to improve or correct. Even if something in the exemplar looks strange or wrong, he copies it as written. If he has serious concerns about the text, he can note them in the margin without changing the main text. But generally, he assumes the exemplar is correct, and his job is simply to reproduce it. All of these error types are present in the manuscript tradition, accumulating over generations of copying. Modern scholars studying medieval texts have to account for this, using complex methods to try to reconstruct original readings from corrupt copies. Brother Thomas is doing his small part to minimize this problem by copying as accurately as possible. He knows he'll never be perfect. Perfection isn't humanly possible, but he can strive for it, can aim for the highest standard of accuracy he's capable of achieving. And on days like today, when he catches and corrects his mistakes promptly, he feels that he's living up to that standard. The work continues. He's corrected the error. The page looks good, and there are many more lines to write before the day is done. Brother Thomas dips his quill in the ink once more and returns to the steady rhythm of copying. Brother Thomas has been writing for about 4 hours when the bell rings for sext, the midday prayer service. The sound of the bell breaks through his concentration, pulling his attention away from the manuscript. He's in the middle of a word, but he stops immediately. When the bell rings, all work ceases. Prayer takes precedence over everything else. He sets down his quill carefully, making sure it doesn't roll off the desk. He places a small weight on the page to keep it from curling. Parchment has a tendency to curl slightly, especially in humid weather, and an unweighted page might warp. The weight is just a smooth river stone, about the size of a walnut, worn smooth by water. It's been serving this purpose for years, sitting on his desk, holding pages flat while the ink dries. The other scribes are also setting down their tools and standing up. Brother Benedict moves slowly, his arthritis making every motion an effort. Brother William stretches vigorously, his young body resilient and full of energy, despite hours of sitting. Brother Peter carefully closes his ink pots. He's been working with expensive pigments for illumination, and he doesn't want them to dry out or get contaminated with dust. They file out of the scriptorium in silence. Down the stairs, across the courtyard to the church, the sun is high now, nearly at its zenith. The day is warm, warmer than it's been in months. Spring is truly here, and soon it will give way to summer. Brother Thomas can feel the warmth on his face and hands as he crosses the open courtyard. It's pleasant after the cool dimness of the scriptorium. The church service is brief, perhaps 15 or 20 minutes. Sext means sixth hour, counting from sunrise, so it's roughly noon. The service consists of psalms, hymns, and prayers, just like all the other hours, but shorter than the morning and evening services. The monks chant, their voices echoing in the stone space, and Brother Thomas lets his mind rest, lets the familiar Latin words wash over him without trying to analyze or understand them deeply. After sext comes the main meal of the day, called dinner. The monks process from the church to the refectory, taking their places at the long tables. The layout is the same as breakfast, but the meal is more substantial. Today, there's pottage, a thick stew made with peas, onions, and barley. There's also bread, of course. Bread is served at every meal, and some salted fish and a bit of cheese. The Benedictine rule doesn't require monks to be vegetarian, but meat is eaten rarely, mainly on feast days. Fish is more common, especially dried or salted fish that can be stored for long periods. The pottage is filling and nutritious, providing the energy needed for afternoon work. As at breakfast, there's a reading during the meal. Today's text is from Gregory the Great's Pastoral Care, a manual for bishops on how to guide and instruct their flocks. The reader's voice rises and falls with the rhythm of the prose, and Brother Thomas eats slowly while listening. He's not particularly hungry, but he eats his portion methodically. The pottage is thick and warm, with a slightly musty flavor from the dried peas. The fish is salty and tough, requiring thorough chewing. The bread is dense and filling. The ale washes it all down. Brother Thomas thinks about the manuscript as he eats. He's made good progress this morning, about a page and a half of a text. Plus, he's started the illuminated initial that will mark the beginning of a new psalm. That initial will take several more hours of work over the coming days, but the basic structure is in place. He's pleased with today's work so far. No major errors, only the one small omission that he caught and corrected. The letters have been consistent, the spacing has been even. If he can maintain this pace, he'll finish the entire manuscript on schedule, maybe even a bit early. But he shouldn't think too far ahead. That way lies anxiety and pressure. Better to focus on the afternoon's work, on the next page, the next line, the next letter. Let the future take care of itself. After dinner, there's a short period of rest. The rule of Saint Benedict recognizes that people need breaks, especially after meals. The monks are free to return to their cells for a nap, to walk in the cloister, or to sit quietly in the shade. The midday break typically lasts about an hour, maybe a bit less. Brother Thomas chooses to walk. He's been sitting all morning, and his body needs movement. His legs are stiff. His back is aching. His neck is sore from being bent forward for hours. Movement will help, will loosen the tight muscles and get his blood flowing. He walks slowly around the cloister, the covered walkway that surrounds the central courtyard. The cloister is one of the architectural defining features of a monastery. A square or rectangular space with a covered walkway on all four sides and an open courtyard in the middle. The walkway protects from sun and rain, making it a pleasant place to walk in any weather. Today, the courtyard is beautiful. There's a small garden with herbs, mint, rosemary, sage, thyme, planted in neat rows. The herbs are used in the monastery kitchen and in the infirmary for medicine. There's also a well in the center of the courtyard, its stone rim worn smooth by generations of monks drawing water. A few birds are splashing in a shallow puddle near the well, and Brother Thomas watches them for a moment, enjoying their simple pleasure. He continues walking, circling the cloister. Other monks are here too, walking in the opposite direction or sitting on stone benches built into the walls. No one speaks. The rule of silence is still in effect. But there's a companionable quality to the shared space. They're together in their solitude. Brother Thomas's mind is relatively quiet as he walks. He's not thinking about anything in particular, just experiencing the movement, the warmth of the sun in the courtyard, the cool shade under the cloister roof, the feeling of his feet on the stone pavement. This is a form of meditation, though he doesn't call it that. It's just being. Existing in the moment without agenda or goal. After about 20 minutes of walking, he feels better. His back is looser, his legs are less stiff. He's ready to return to work. He makes his way back toward the library building, climbing the stairs to the scriptorium. The scriptorium in the afternoon has a different quality than in the morning. The light is warmer, more golden, coming from a different angle through the windows. It's still good light for working, but it's softer, less crisp. Brother Thomas finds that the afternoon light is better for certain kinds of work. Illumination, for instance, where color is more important than extreme precision, and less good for others, like writing very small text or making fine corrections. Today, he plans to continue with the regular text rather than working on the illumination. He wants to make more progress on the psalm he's copying, to complete at least another half page before Vespers, the evening service. He settles onto his stool, flexes his fingers, and examines the page. The ink from this morning's work has dried completely, turning from brownish to black. The letters are crisp and clear. He's satisfied with how the page looks. He picks up his quill and dips it in the ink. The ink is slightly thicker than it was this morning. It's been sitting open for hours, and some water has evaporated. He adds a few drops of water from a small flask he keeps on his desk, stirring the ink with a thin stick until the consistency is right. He returns to the exemplar, finds his place, and begins writing. The afternoon rhythm is similar to the morning rhythm, but somehow gentler, less urgent. Brother Thomas has already done his best work of the day. The morning is when his mind is sharpest, his hand is steadiest. His concentration is at its peak. The afternoon is for maintaining momentum, for steady progress, for doing good work even if it's not his absolute best. He writes line after line, his hand moving steadily across the page. The quill scratches softly against the parchment. The afternoon is warm, and the room is quiet except for this sound, multiplied by 7 scribes, all working simultaneously. It's a peaceful sound, a sound of productivity without urgency, of work being done well and thoroughly. Brother Thomas's mind wanders slightly as he works. Not so much that he makes errors, but enough that he's thinking about other things while his hands perform their practiced motions. He thinks about the garden he saw in the courtyard, about how the herbs are growing well this year. He thinks about Brother Benedict's arthritis, wondering how much longer the old scribe will be able to work. He thinks about Stephen, his apprentice, who's showing real promise but still has years of training ahead. These thoughts drift through his mind like clouds across the sky, present but not intrusive. They don't interfere with his work. If anything, they help, giving his conscious mind something to occupy itself with, while his hands and eyes do what they've been trained to do. The afternoon passes. The light shifts gradually as the sun moves toward the west. Brother Thomas completes another half page, reaching his goal. He sets down his quill, satisfied. It's been a good day, productive, error-free after that one small mistake, steady and calm. The bell for Vespers rings. The afternoon's work is done. Tomorrow, he'll return and continue where he left off. The manuscript will grow, page by page, line by line, until it's complete. And then there will be another manuscript, and another after that. This is Brother Thomas's life. This is what he does. And as he stands and stretches, preparing to head to the evening service, he feels a quiet contentment. The work is hard, yes. His body aches, yes. But there's satisfaction in it, in the slow accumulation of completed pages, in the knowledge that he's preserving something valuable, in the simple fact of doing his work well. He follows the other scribes out of the scriptorium and toward the church, where the evening prayers await. The day is drawing toward its close, but the rhythm continues, unchanging and eternal.